Hey everyone, it's Bryce here from Scrape Diary. Now today I'm doing a part two to my project on scraping the UK government's gender pay gap service. Now, if you haven't seen part one, I'm going to link that in the description. Go over there, where basically I did a bit of a background on why you might want to use information on this website. Essentially, if you're looking for a business that has more than 250 staff in the UK, there is a requirement on those businesses to report their gender pay gap, which means essentially if you're in a top of funnel team doing B2B sales, you can essentially find a curated list of all of those businesses and use that information to target them using information that's verified from the government. So very, very good data source there. Now, what we did in part one is we broke down the website, we looked at the HTML and the CSS, and we essentially worked out how we would build a scraper looking at that information. Part two, we're going to go in today and we're going to build the scraper. So we're going to use a tool called Apify today, which I'm going to take you through. We're going to be writing a couple little lines of code. It's not going to be a huge amount of work. And if you haven't written any code before, that's fine. Most of this is boilerplate, so you can essentially just change the stuff that I've written. And I'm going to make that resource available for you on the Scrape Diary website. Before we get into it though, quick plug, Scrape Diary is a weekly newsletter where I run through tips and techniques for top of funnel teams, so sales and marketing, showing you how to build web scrapers, web automation, basically to automate your revenue growth for your business. So if that sounds like something you're into, jump in there and I'll be basically putting something of value like this in your inbox every week. So now that's out of the way, let's jump into it. So as I mentioned, we're going to be using a tool called Apify. I'm going to run down this page and show you how all of it works, but just quickly, this is the website that we're going to be scraping the UK government's gender pay gap service. What we did in part one is we essentially showed the format of this website. So we essentially want to build a scraper that goes down this list and takes all this information out. It then clicks, next through here to get all of that. And then for each of those companies, we want it basically to drill down into the company list. We wanted it to pull out the actual individual report, and then we wanted it to take some information off that report. So that's what we're going to do today. Right, so where I'll start, and as I said in the last video, we're essentially going to be making two scrapers. You can combine them into one, but just for clarity, we're going to be making two. So one, what this top one will do is basically get these 12,000 results, and it's basically going to be taking this sort of high level information in here. Now, as you remember, I opened up the dev tools and I showed basically in here the information that we want. So under, for each class of document that we've got here, basically what we wanted to do is we wanted to get that A link off there to get the name of the business, and we wanted to get that href attribute to get the individual page underneath. We wanted to get the address, and then we wanted to get some of this metadata information in here that holds the industry. So that's essentially what we're going to do today. Now over to Apify. Now just a quick thing on Apify. So they're a cloud-based web scraping, web automation platform. They give you a really good user interface to a headless Chrome browser, which is essentially what you'll be using to visit these websites and take the information off for processing. Now, they've got various features in their system. One are basically called actors, where essentially you can program directly a headless Chrome browser. And then actors run tasks, and those tasks basically carry out individual automations that we may want to use. Now, there is a pre-built actor in there for a web scraper, which is essentially what we're using today. All we need to do is basically program in the task, which is what I'm going to be doing. So this will be the first time you may have seen Apify, so I'm just going to step through it quite quickly. The way that this works is you'll essentially at first give it what's called a start URL. As the name would suggest, that is where the scraper is first going to visit, and it's going to land at that page. It's going to take the HTML and the CSS out, and then it's going to run this page function that we write in here. Now, as I mentioned, if you're not familiar with writing code, that's completely fine. I'll be giving you this code, and you can essentially just change whatever you need to for any other projects that you want. There's some other stuff in here, link selectors. That basically tells the web scraper, okay, what links can we click on. So if we want to get it to visit other pages, that's going to be really helpful. And then there's a few other options in there which we'll explore. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to dive into this. So this start URL here that I've given it, that is essentially this page that we're on. So this is essentially where we wanted to start in terms of pulling through, in terms of where to start and get that information and start clicking through. Okay, so as we saw before, we wanted to get information in here for this A link, the address, the metadata. Okay, now what Apify will do is give you a section here to write this code, and what essentially it's doing is using jQuery, which is a library for JavaScript that allows us to pull information out from those HTML and those CSS tags. Now, what this is doing, I'll just focus on this bit first in here, this results bit. Now, essentially on this top level bit, there's 4 bits of information we want. We want the name of the business, we want the link to the individual page, we want the address of that business, and we want the industry. Now, the way that we do that, and this is why in part 1 we went through and we looked at all of what the HTML and CSS looks like, is we can use actual libraries that will help us find those individual bits and then pull the information off. So as an example, the name of the business, that is going to be, we knew that that was going to be a header 2, okay? If we look back in here, we can see that essentially what this is a list items with class document. And what I've done is I've basically pointed it at this comparison employer container, okay? So essentially what we've got it to do is when it lands on that page, we grab all of those sections of code that are this comparison employer container, and this dot in front of it basically means that's the class that we're getting. So that's going to give you that little bit inside of all of those list items in there. And then for each of those things, we're going to look into them and we're going to find, okay, where's the header 2? What is the header 2 element in there? And in this case, it's the name. All right, once we've found that element, we can use the function's text, and what that will do is it will take the information that's associated with that tag, it will convert it to text. In this case, it's going to be the name. And I normally throw in the trim function at the end just to trim any white space that might be before or after there. So it neatens up our end result. Okay, now for this link, if we just basically ignore this concat bit at the start, is more or less the same thing. So we're going to be finding here the A tag, which is what we saw before. And this time, when we find the A tag, what we want off that A tag is the href attribute, okay? Now that's the attribute that tells us the link to the individual page. So that's the bit we're going to get there. Address, so we're going to find the tag that's literally address. We're going to then get the text from that. We're going to trim it up like we did with the name. And for the industry as well, we're going to use that metadata text value class that was on there, and the same thing, text and trim. So you can see how that lines up here, right? So the H2 tag, that was basically where we're getting the name. So we're basically getting what's in there by that, converting it to text, trimming it. So that basically gives us the name. To get the link, then essentially what we're doing is getting that A tag that's in there, getting the href value off it, storing that. Then getting the address tag, which is what we saw again. Remember, this is a tag, not a class, so we can literally just say address, not dot address. And then in here, we were using that metadata text value class, so it would be dot metadata text value, converted to text, and then trim. So that's essentially how we get that. Now, just one other little bit that I've added in here. You'll notice when we get the href attribute, what that does is essentially gives us /link, right? So if we go back here and we actually look at it, you can see it gives us /employer/ the unique employer code. When you then pull that into the document, what we'd really want is genderpaygapservice.gov.uk/employer/ that in order to complete the link. So essentially what I've done in here is I've just basically defined what the base URL is, and then I use the concat, which is the concatenation function, basically just to add those two things together. You don't need to do that. You could clean it up afterwards in Excel. So you could basically just add those two things together. I've just added it in here in order for it to be a little bit simpler. Okay, I'm going to turn the scraper on in a second, but one final thing I wanted to do. This would all be well and good. So, we know we've told the scraper basically how to go and get those information for each list item on this page, but we want this to visit multiple pages. We want it to step through, I think it's 600 and something pages. We want to step through all of that and get the information. So that basically means we need to tell this scraper, okay, what links should it be clicking on in order to go to the next page, visit them, and then run this page function again, okay? And we saw in the last video how we were able to use that .pagination next class in there. So if I just basically run down to the bottom here and I inspect that, right? So you see you've got pagination next as a class in there, and then a child of that is this A tag in here, which basically has the link to go to the next page, right? The way that you do that in Apify is you basically say, and again, this is CSS selector. They say .pagination next. That's basically giving you that top bit, and then we just say, okay, click on the A tag. That's a child of that. So that's basically nested underneath that, and then it will click on that. So what we're going to do, we're going to start this just so you can see what it looks like. Okay, I'm just going to drag this up a little bit so I can hit save and run. Now this is really cool because, and this is why I love Apify so much, is because it handles all of this stuff for you. It's running this headless Chrome browser. You can see how it's basically doing a bunch of logging in there, and we can actually see this data set in real time. So we can actually go in here and go to preview the data, right? And we can see, okay, we get the address, the industry, the link, and the name. And you can actually see, as I'm refreshing that, it's pulling through more information. It's telling us how many requests it's done. So that's one request per page. So every time it's clicking next, it's doing a new request. It shows us the size of the resulting data set. And if we want to build in some logging and stuff, debugging, we could do that in the log as well. So we could, be monitoring it that way. Right. And this is one of the reasons why I really like Apify over, just a plain old, Python or other library, because you won't have the same amount of debugging in there as you would with this, but it still gives you a huge amount of power to write your own code, right? Now, I won't let that run over all the results, but you can see here it is working and it's pulling all the information off. So if I just basically abort that, okay, now what you can actually do now that you've got this, if you go dataset detail, you can download that, okay, and you can download it straight to CSV, and that basically is going to give you all of that sort of top level information that we want, right? Now, the second part of this is we need to go and visit each individual pay gap report. Okay, so if we basically go back to the top here, we knew we wanted the scraper basically to click on there, which is why we got that href element, and then we were able to go, we wanted it to view the report. We saw as well in that first video that you could essentially get whatever year of report you wanted by basically adding a / and the year onto the individual report's URL. So that's what we're going to do. And one thing you can do from here, so let's just say if we use this one as an example, all right. What we're going to do now is we're going to build a scraper that visits this individual page and pulls that information off. And just so we know what we're working with, if we inspect the element, on this page, essentially what we want is the information in here. So that's the stuff in the employer report metadata. And we want, this stuff in here, this metadata text value stuff for each of these divs. So for each div, we want the metadata text value. So for here, it's the snapshot date. For the div below it, it's the employer size. And then below that, you've got the person responsible. And you remember from the first one that it was basically broken up into two spans, and we would get the individual spans there. Also, quite often there'll be another link down here that we want to get, which basically links to their website, okay? Now, we're going to build the secondary scraper, and I've got this up and running here. One of the really cool things Apify lets you do is, you can actually put in a start URL, which we're going to do here. That can be an indistinct URL, or it can be a file with a list of URLs, which is what I've been doing to pull all 12,000 of those results off. But just for the course of this, we're going to use the URL. Now, for this, we don't need any link selector. We're basically going to get this to visit each individual page. So it doesn't need to click on anything. All that's fine. What we do want it to run is this page function in here. And here, where there's a couple of things we want. We want the company name, we want the report date, the employer size, contact name, contact title, and the website. Okay. And you'll see, remember in the last one, we basically made it step down each list item. Well, in this one, we don't need to get it to do that. We don't need to write an each statement. We just essentially can write some queries that run directly on the page and they only run once. Now, company name, so we can get that through this organization name ID here. Text, convert that to text and trim it. We saw that before. Okay, and then this bit through the middle here is something interesting. So what we do is under this employer report metadata class, which I'll show you in a second, we can run a function called find for the metadata text value, right? So that was this stuff in here, metadata text value. Now, when you do that, when you do a find on that, you're going to get all of the items that match that, right? So you're going to get 5th of April being one entry, you're going to get 250 to 499 employees as another entry, and then you're going to get person responsible as a third entry. So you're essentially going to get an array of values back from there. And this is where you can use this EQ function in here. So this basically says, okay, if I've got multiple items that I pull off in here, EQ0 gives me the first one. Okay, EQ1 gives me the second one, EQ2 gives me the third one, that sort of thing. So that basically allows us, because we know that those divs are going to be in there, we can pull the first one off. We know that's going to be the report date. So we'll pull that off and go text trim. EQ1, which is the second item, we know that's always going to be the employer size, so we can do the text and trim to that. And then remember, for the person responsible, which is the third item down, this bit here, there was 2 spans in there. So for EQ2, which is the third item, we could then find the spans that are in there. So we can basically do that again. So we can go .find span, and remember that gives us 2 items. So when we go .find on that span, it gives us Philip Galt for the first one, or EQ0, managing director for the second one, or EQ1, right? So then we can just do that again, EQ0, EQ1, and we have those. We go text trim, pull all that information through, okay? Now the website's interesting. This one isn't a great example of it, but if I find potentially another one, let's see. I won't spend too long doing this, but hopefully we can quickly find one where they've got it. Okay, yeah, so this is a good example. So what's really cool about this site is that it also gives us here quite often a link to the company's own website, which is this bit in here, right? And we can pull that off. So we can go in our scraper down here and we can say, okay, the employee report metadata, find the A tag, right? Get the EQ2 or the third one down and get the attribute href. Now what I'm talking about there, if we inspect this, is, all right, so when we get the A tag, we can see each of these are links. So it's essentially going to give us, so that's going to be A0, that there is going to be A1, and this here is going to be A2, or the third one along. So we can essentially grab that, pull out the href link, which is the website, and then away you go. So that's in there, and keep in mind, I've gone through this fairly quickly because you can play this back. but also because I'm going to include the code, which I'll fully comment and put um, on our library, on our code library over at Scrape Diary. So I'm going to hit save and run now. Okay. Again, you can see it basically booting up, and you get all this logging, all that stuff. There's only one request in this example to do. We can look at the data set, preview that, and this is what we get. So we get the company name, the contact title. Now, if we'd been particularly smart, we could have, for instance, stripped out these open and close brackets in here, get the employee size, employer date. One thing we're missing here is the website. This particular link did not include that information, so we don't get it, but you'll get it on most of the ones that do, okay? So what I'll essentially do from here, so now this works, now we know this works, we can actually upload a text file with thousands of URLs that we want to do, and it will basically run each one by one, and it will generate a CSV at the end that we can then pull down and use. And then that's basically going to be some more information that we can enrich by getting it to visit the website or doing anything else that we want it to do. So that is a really quick run through of building this in Apify. Please, if you have any questions, jump on over to Scrape Diary and reach out to us. We're also going to be hosting this code there, which you can pull down. But hopefully, this basically gives you, I guess, an excuse to jump on, even to start using the free tier in Apify. Play around, they do make it super easy. And I'll be releasing more videos like this that show you how to scrape other websites like this one. So, guys, like I said, jump on over to Scrape Diary. You won't regret it. I'll basically be putting tips and techniques in your inbox every week. And that's all for now. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.